Okay, we are doing a quick first episode of 2026, episode 23, kind of a spur of the moment. Alex and I were just chatting. We have a podcast on MedBridge on value based care basics. We just recorded our 5th out of 5 series. And so Alex and I said, while we're talking, let's quick record our episode 23. And Alex, Sunday night, he sends a literature review. He is the absolute king of keeping up with literature. I'm sure many of you follow him on LinkedIn. I'm watching his subscribers, followers multiply by the minute, it feels like, because you have a way of translating this information so well and then sharing it with our future proof PT subscribers. So I'm just going to kind of give a quick summary of the topic for the week. Alex wrote to everybody about a synthesis of motor control, movement science, and evidence-based evidence gap in musculoskeletal care. And this is everything we talk about has a relationship in one way or another, some little node that links back to value-based care. Practicing evidence-based medicine is critical to value-based care. So I love this. What Alex said, as we enter 2026, physical therapy stands at a crossroads. We have sophisticated frameworks for understanding low back pain, compelling value props for our role in healthcare systems, and evolving research methodologies that challenge us to rethink what quote unquote evidence really means. So in this week's review, Alex is tracing a narrative arc from motor control theory to real world implementation, examining both the convergence of clinical models and the gaps that remain in translating research into practice. So, Alex, why don't you tell us a little bit about the first article, which is the convergence and divergence in motor control approaches?
Right on, Dana. And I think it's so important considering that we are the movement specialists and the movement is our bread and butter. Having appreciation of these converging philosophies in how movement should be analyzed, what is normal and abnormal movement. There are two key terms here, which is like there is what is accepted as a normal movement diagnostic criteria and an abnormal, and then there is a normal range of human movement. And we, as a clinical community, have done two things well. We have done a decent job classifying these normal and abnormal movements and outliers. And so, certainly from the work of Shirley Sarman and others before. And so she's built the entire institution on these movements, but the air of caution is we also have a capacity to pathologize and create these what would be considered a normal outlier as something that should be treated. But still, I think that the first article gives you a system of analysis, and the system of analysis is integral in clinical care provision. So if you have a system, you are more likely to create a clinical impact than if you are not working with the system. And so, as a professional, as a clinician, the first article gives you that exposure to these systems, whether it's a movement, what's it, MDT, mechanical diagnosis and treatment from McKenzie, right, or MSI, or integrated movement systems. As long as you have a philosophy that is at the foundation of your principle, that is still beats anyone who doesn't have it. So I think the first article was just something that layers a foundation of movement as an insight, especially in 2026, where you have like these systems that converge, and then we're trying to standardize the care delivery process.
I love this because I remember being a therapist very early on and thinking, oh my gosh, everybody's in these buckets. They either subscribe to this or they subscribe to that. And it made no sense to me that you could just be like a practitioner of one theory or one hypothesis or one way of treating. It matters less, it sounds like, what you subscribe to specifically, but that you follow a system. And that's an important component as we
Absolutely.
think about the critical role that movement and function plays in patients' total physical and medical picture.
And again, so important to get away from the tribal indoctrination into the one system being the absolute source of truth. Being agile in terms that everybody can be right. Like the MDT and MSI and ISM, all are systems that are designed for classification, but it doesn't make them any more wrong or right. So this article does a decent job actually looking into some of the alignment between the systems. But it's a foundation of structure that is necessary. As a clinician, you have to have a structure, and you have to be open to new philosophies as they emerge, but that still has to be layered on some foundational structure, which some don't have, but we need.
So for Tuesday's article, it is the movement control classification system. So from 2017, and it's a treatment based classification system for patients with low back pain. The movement control approach. So why don't you kind of go into what those key insights are that you saw and that you shared?
So I think it's a perfect bridge between a complete biomechanical model, which is now vastly antiquated, and a practical model of clinical care, which involves biomechanics, but also takes the patient-centric approach where n equals one. It's the patient that moves, or the individual that pursues care that moves, and not just the core foundational philosophy. So you have to take some of the biomechanics and you have to look into which system is hypofunctional. So I think if you zoom out a little bit, we are first order primates, and our primary responsibility is to fit into our immediate environment. And that requires energy. So any system that is depleted of energy will reduce its environmental fitness. And so when you look into environmental efficiency, you have to identify the system that is failing to integrate into that environment, whether it's a top-down system, that the loss of motor control, or bottom-up system, that like there is some kind of a musculoskeletal or neuromusculoskeletal insufficiency. Either one, there's a way to classify and to identify the system based on its peak performance and then to intervene, right? So like each system will require a slightly different intervention. Well, if it's a top-down system that creates this hyperfunction, then you carry a very different set of tools into the clinical practice than if it's a bottom-up system. And that again has to integrate into the individual because PT has to realize that the person who you're treating, like they carry a lot of baggage to the practice that goes beyond physical appearance and physical capacity. And so that the entire emotive psychosocial model needs to also be appreciated here. But again, it's a foundation, right? So it's a foundation of movement control systems that govern our environmental fitness. And so this article is pretty useful.
My big takeaway is a reminder that we preach certain things should be standardized and we should follow a structure so that there is a cohesiveness and a standardization in practice of how we do things, but that we have to individualize the care we provide to each specific patient based on their individual characteristics and what their specific needs are. So it's not one or the other. In fact, we are not providing good care. I love that this brings us back to, we don't just talk about standardization, we also talk about the only really good care is care that is specific to each patient and their total picture. So
Yeah,
that's a
yeah,
great
like
article.
and always equals one. I think, and it's important caveat to even appreciate that the same patient is a different patient between episodes of care. Like the same patient on Monday is a very different patient on Wednesday. Life happens, and life has an impact on your performance. And a good clinician will recognize that the battery of weight that this individual is carrying and intervene appropriately too, versus the one size fits all where you design the plan of care and you're going to execute regardless of what the individual tells you. It's that hammer and the nail, right? Like it's, you don't want to be the hammer or the nail. You want to be a professional that uses your professional training to identify the system's failure to optimize based to their environment.
Mm, yeah, what a great takeaway. This next article, it's called The Value Proposition of Physical Therapy in Musculoskeletal Care. It's from the Journal of Orthopedic and Sports PT from 2022. So, Alex, do you mind sharing your takeaways from this?
Yeah, so this is a foundational, I guess, more of a bragging right article that I like to
Yeah,
stick into whenever there's an
but it's
argument that
good for sharing with other stakeholders. I love this.
oh, it is. And so the two key authors here, like you should pay attention to is like, well, I should say three. Julie Fritz is absolutely magnificent. She's just like a mensch in the physical therapy world. She's dedicated her life in justifying and validating physical therapy as a discipline. And so John Child and Tim Flynn have helped her a lot, and Stephen George as well, in creating this, justifying and again validating the value proposition that PTs are safe, PTs are evidence driven, even if we're not always evidence based, but the service is evidence driven, and patients' satisfaction with the experience, which is something, right? Like healthcare is an industry, and so we can't only be like the robots that are execute plan, right? Like we have to align with our patients, and so patients like us. I think that's, if nothing else, that is also something that can be quantified and can be measured, is we're well tolerated, we're safe, and we're liked. And think of, like, we have a good foundation. Only if we build the previous two articles, if we start employing systems, then we have it all made. But this one is a really good article because I think it aligns with starting a conversation to position physical therapy as a primary care provider for musculoskeletal disorders, like PTs being able to oversee some of the overflow of patients and reduce the strain on the system by providing primary care for musculoskeletal problems.
You love it, right? Primary care physicians and advanced practice providers are not the ideal first contact providers. Orthopedists, not the ideal first contact providers. We are. And we stopped largely at direct access, thinking that that would fix everything, and policymakers and the public would just see us and would come to us when they had pain or movement problems or functional deficits, and we just stopped achieving half, and we haven't moved to the second half. This is a reminder. These things are factual. We owe it to the public. We owe it to our communities to get us positioned and speak about this in a factual and influential way so that we are able to serve all of the population and that we're seen as that first contact provider. We go on and on about this, but I love that you highlighted this. Thursday, okay, disentangling contextual effects. So this article is disentangling contextual effects from musculoskeletal treatments. Love this. This is from Arthritis and Cartilage in what year? 2021. Okay.
So context matters, and I love contextual factors. So if you look into, like, so our good friend Jerry Durham, right? Like he published with a team a couple of years ago, maybe 2 years ago, on similar topic where how context influences clinical outcomes in musculoskeletal care. But context is rarely defined and rarely measured in a lot of these randomized controlled trials. But context matters. Where individual receives care matters. I think there's a spotlight effect. When you are playing the role of a patient, you will play a very different role and position than playing a role of a clinician, which you also have a spotlight effect. Context in terms of the environment, the paint on your clinic walls is going to have an impact on clinical outcomes. The ambient temperature in your room is going to have an impact on your clinical outcomes because there is enough of sensitization, there's enough of an impact on your general physiology from your environment. Like, ultimately, we're still animals surviving in the jungle, right? Like, so you're in the savannah trying to live to see another day, and most of your systems are primed to accentuate the survival. So when context is not fitting to your immediate survival, that impacts your output, your physiological output. And so when you're examining things, like, this is obviously the Journal of Osteoarthritis and looks into that specific diagnoses. Osteoarthritis is such a complex disorder, right? Because a true osteoarthritis is an observation, not a disorder. Age-adjusted decline in articular cartilage is not a disease; it's an observation. I can be, like, now that I'm entering my late 40s, I have a degenerative face disease, right? Because my face is slowly sinking into the ground.
Gravity always wins, Alex.
Dude, and yeah, like, so I have degenerative wrinkle disease, degenerative baldness disease, degenerative face disease. Like, arthritis is that too, where, like, we look into these changes and we medicalize and pathologize these changes. But the truth is that there's a lot that happens around us, and that context matters. So as a clinician, you have to understand how there is a complexity in these systems, and this complexity and contextual factors are part of that complexity. All influence your presentation as a provider or as a patient or all of the above. The interaction influences that, and so I think that's a caveat to, like, I am very much trying to be an evidence-based provider and practitioner, but you can't be 100% evidence-based provider because it's impossible to account for all of these contextual factors influencing your clinical outcomes, but it's important to be aware of them.
Yeah, and outcomes aren't just because of the exact clinical care that you provided, right? It's a host of being able to take in all of those potential inputs and then gearing the treatment so that patients are most likely to help achieve the outcomes that are possible for them. I love this. And I love that we're big cheerleaders for PTOT, et cetera, but everyone has to be able to also criticize themselves or look for areas that they could do better. And I think that highlighting that we need more placebo controlled trials and that we have to be able to defend our interventions in an evidence based way. Never has it been more important when we're being looked at through the lens of what value are you creating. So, love this article. Okay, last article. Friday's article is the pain related fear and mobility variability. So, associations between pain related fear and lumbar movement variability during activities of daily living in patients with chronic low back pain and healthy control. So this is from 2024. Okay, share the key insights with us,
Yeah,
Alex.
so this one is really important, and it builds on a, I think, pretty well-established body of evidence where fear and avoidance behavior and pain catastrophization is domain specific. It's not general. So we used to consider fear as a broad term that applies to all of the pain-specific conditions, and we now know that fear and aversion and catastrophization are movement specific, domain specific, position specific, occupation specific, which again creates a little bit more complexity where just because you conducted a FABQ before you started your clinical care, that FABQ does not measure all of the task specific fear objects that individual provides. Best example being if you are treating an injured worker, like if it's a workers' comp case, and you are providing most of your care in the safety of your clinic, that does not, or that the care you provide does not always translate to viable outcomes in a place of work. The place of work carries its own fear component that does not get reproduced in your clinic because your clinic is safety. And so this is, if you have a large industrial health population, you definitely have to make an effort to be at the place of work, reproducing some of the same skills, some of the same interventions as you do in your clinic. Fear is context specific, it's contextual. Fear is domain specific. So fear and avoidance behavior cannot be generalized to be apply to everything. And I think, again, a good clinician is able to communicate. And to go back to even Thursday's article, there are two sets of objective data that you can collect that I think apply to both of these. And one is patient specific functional scale, which I think, in terms of outcome measures, there is a diagnosis specific, outcome specific outcome measures, but then there is a patient specific outcome measure, which is PSFS, right? You have an individual line up the three things that they fear most, and then you have them grade their level of fear or level of disability or level of impact, and then you work towards those goals. So PSFS is absolutely vital as a part of the like a larger battery of outcome measures. And the other one is rating of perceived exertion. Now, rating of perceived exertion is absolutely brilliant as a way of gauging the level of effort an individual is putting into their own self-care, which is different than rating of exertion or one rep max or any other objective test that gives you the insight into their physical performance, because rating of perceived exertion puts the individual as the gatekeeper, the coach of their own output, which is really important and really necessary. So I think it's really important again to understand the complexity while still embracing the simplicity, right? It's a paradox that we're incredibly complex beings, but you need to simplify it to the level of a 5-year-old, right? Who's the physicist? That Nobel Prize winning physicist from 1960s who was investigating the crash of like the Challenger spacecraft.
Yeah, name's
And
escaping
his last
me.
name starts with an F. But he had like his model of understanding complex concepts is to simplify them to a level of a 5-year-old, right? So I think it's that. And in terms of just general reading and articles, I probably have a failure of being the fox, not the hedgehog. Like the fox knows many things and the hedgehog knows one thing, right? The exposure to these articles, my retention is probably 3% at best. But the general concepts, I think it's like understanding that the layered complexity, that is my personal mission in a professional life, is to understand the complexity of the field that we're working in.
I mean, This is just incredibly valuable. We focus on value-based care in a lot of our conversations, but future-proof PT means advancing the profession so it can sustain and grow in every possible way and in good and mature ways. And I think to be able to, look at research over the last couple of years and look where strengths and weaknesses are, where opportunities are, and remind everybody what we can be talking more about, it just adds to the conversation. For everybody listening who happens to be picking this up for the first time, subscribe to our newsletter. I'll put the link in the comments and I'll put this article in the show notes so you guys can reference these articles, what we just talked about, a call to action for 2026 from these articles. So, did you want to go through those for 1 minute or did you want me to just touch on them?
Let's do the call to action. I'll do the clinicians. You can do the researchers. But I think it's so important for us, like at physical therapy. Like I'm a physical therapist, so I'll just say physical therapy. It really applies to OT, speech, and everyone else. But we have to move away from tribalism. We continue to fight each other when our main task is to survive and to thrive, right? And the thrive, like unity brings prosperity. And that means unity that we all have a shared task, which is to bring wellness to patients that pursue our care. And we cannot get there by being tribal. We cannot get there by continuing to fight if my philosophy is better than your philosophy, or if my level of care is superior to your level of care. We have to do better as a discipline, as a community. But I also think that as a community, we need to have better finger on the pulse of standards. We need to standardize our output. We need to know what it is that we do, and we need to know why we do it, and we need to know who we do it to. We need to have an identity as a professional, which right now we're missing. There is no one core physical therapy identity. Like if you ask 10 physical therapists what it is that you do, and I've done that as a controlled field experiment, you always get a different answer. You never get the same answer. And I just don't think it applies to other healthcare professionals. A cardiologist will tell you what they do, and it's going to be pretty generalizable to other cardiologists, right? So we can do better. And then lastly, for clinicians, is recognize the complexity from the contextual factors. There's just a lot of things out there. Continue to look into the world with a air of curiosity. Like, be curious. So to me, being humble and being curious are the two. That's my Magna Carta. Is I know I don't know anything, and I always want to learn. At least try to learn.
There's so much to learn. The other calls to action you put in here about researchers. So, call to action for researchers in the therapy space to conduct large scale validation studies of classification systems, right on. Standardized movement and psychological assessment tools. I'm blown away by how many we have. And to the point you just made earlier, if we can't speak to the other stakeholders in healthcare, policymakers, other practitioners, if we can't speak to them succinctly and simply about what our value is and what we do, right? And have things that are standardized that everybody knows and everybody knows how to do and does as a standardization of their practice, it becomes harder for our profession to integrate fully into healthcare. So again, those standard assessment tools, then embed mediation analyses in pragmatic trials to understand the mechanism, also important, and to conduct more placebo-controlled trials despite logistical challenges. Think that's it. These studies are not easy to conduct.
Do you remember that, like that the hierarchy of clinical research, and like with the level 5 evidence, level 4 evidence,
Yep.
at least like for the researchers and academics, there's pressure. I at one point was a pseudo academic, very briefly, and will dip my fingers back into it. But it's that it's that there's a pressure to provide garbage because you have pressure to publish. But what you're publishing, is it benefiting your profession? And if it's not benefiting your profession, then you're just publishing for the sake of publishing. It's like you're seeing patients for the sake of seeing patients. But there's more you can do. And I think setting up these models, asking the right questions, I think as a researcher, your job is to ask the right question and then go through the proper pathways to get there. Do what you're trained to do, which is give us, the field workers, the worker ants, good evidence to work with. And I think for leaders and advocates, it's like you and I have been spent now over a year talking about value-based care. I think it is so important to transition to something that holds us accountable for our outcomes, that holds us accountable. But it's important for us to increase our valuation. I think we need to earn more. We need to make more. We can't continue to relive the same Groundhog Day year after year and then wonder why nothing changes. Like it's like I saw a comment in one of the online posts about like value-based care will always live only in theory and never in fact, right? Well, there's a reason why that individual is jaded. It's because they're not applying themselves to making this model work, and others are. And so I think, as you, Dana, often say, is that if we will be left behind if we don't take this opportunity. And then we become just a fringe niche employees, and then that's nothing good will happen.
I think of it this way. People, quote, air quotes, believe in things that are not even provable, right? Right. We have these deep convictions, for example, about certain ideology or religion. Well, those things are never going to be proven. But value based care is still a baby. It is like legitimately, for most everyone, it's really only a decade or so old. I mean, it roots go back a little further, but not much. We've been doing transactional fee for service care for decades and decades and decades. And then everybody practicing medicine or allied health or whatever has also been doing exactly this, exactly what their employers have wanted them to do, because it's how we're all paid. So we think value based care is going to be snap of the finger. It's going to turn over everything. I mean, it's just use our brains. It is so unrealistic. You just have to look at where it is having major, major impacts. I am going to bring up because this is the last thing I looked at before we got on our recording. There's a model, because I'm going to prove just in one model that we've seen progress, the accountable health communities model. It's not a PT specific model, but just there's a quick fact sheet about it. Accountable health communities model was basically you do a screening tool for your population on their risk factors, social determinant of health factors. Just in the process of screening was all that was required. But in the process of screening and having some interaction with a healthcare professional about those risk factors, it reduced total cost of care by 4%. And that was only a few-year model. Like,
Hmm.
think about that. We have to test what intervention differences, what process changes will lead to different outcomes in patients' experience, in their functional, their safety, their clinical outcomes, and in spend. And there's a reason that this is a research and development process. So, to all the naysayers, we get it. We know that this is like, well, why isn't it? Why aren't we all just providing value based care? Because we're figuring it out. But you don't have to just believe it. You can look at where models have made a difference, even in short periods of time, even in flawed evaluations, even in flawed methodologies that pick out specific types of providers, et cetera. You have to be part of the game if you ever want a chance to win, or to your earlier point about you have to have a lottery ticket if you ever want to win the lottery, which, not to suggest anybody plays the lottery, but we can't say if we didn't try something, we can't ever say, well, it doesn't work. We have to give it a chance. So
Yeah.
rant over, but
Do or not, do or do not. There is no try, right? In the words of a philosopher Yoda. And Richard Feynman was the
Richard
physicist.
Feynman.
Yeah, that's Dana. I think 100% right on. It's leadership starts with one individual in a clinic trying to make change. Leadership doesn't. It's not going to be handed to you.
That's right.
Nothing in life is handed to you. Now you have to earn it, and the way you earn it is through exposure. And like that A/B testing that you're referencing, like don't go full in to value-based care if you don't feel comfortable, but dip your fingers into it, dip your toes into it, get enough, or at least so you understand it. Instead of poo-pooing it, understand that there are other models that are being emphasized and being created to help you get paid more for what you do, but you have to be willing to take on risk. You are now a sheep that has been fed for years, and so you have such an innate fear of moving away from your established food supply because you're afraid of starving. But the matter is, you already are skinny and you're starving. The food supply has been dwindling. Now you're surviving on 50% of the calories you did a year ago, but you still manage to only live by that single food supply. Like there's other food out there. Like you can make your own cake and you can eat it, but you have to do it through exposure. So I hope people listening will take that into consideration.
And if you like this episode, give us some feedback, because this was spur of the moment. Honestly, just full transparency, but I really like this format, Alex. You do all this work anyway. I mean, really, it's pretty cool to talk through it and then kind of link to other bigger concepts that we talk about, that's sort of, brings it all together.
So don't let me even get started on talking about the books I read. So that would be like a much longer
I
episode.
can't. Give us one book you've read in the last 2 weeks that if you had to recommend only one, you'd say you would not regret reading this or listening to it if you're like me and
So
multitask.
I now, like, I'm old enough to have a system of rereading some books, and I reread The Alchemist the last week of December. And for me, like, it's like I think I texted you, like it has, like, I have never read The Alchemist. It's a short read, and
I
not that
have it. I haven't read it, but
more.
I do own it.
Oh my God! Like, so like, and so for me, the insight this time, right? So like it's about a somebody who herds sheep, right? What is it? Oh,
A sheep herder.
sheep herder. Okay, who goes on this adventure, right?
I
Like,
don't
so who
know.
goes on this adventure to find his own personal treasure, and so he meets characters and he develops as an individual, and he innovates, and he finally understands that, like, without spoiling, the treasure is him. Like, he is the treasure. But the little caveats, the little nuances of points where there's a point in the book where he wants to go on a journey, but he needs money to go on the journey. And there's a point, the communication with his father, where the father wants to pay for his journey because that's a journey he himself never took. He never took the risk. So he's willing to invest into his child. And me, I'm a father, right? So like I'm seeing, like, investment into my children because I want them to be happy, because there's a lot of opportunities that I may have not had as an immigrant or as just where we are, that I want them to be better, happier people than we are. So that was a nuance that, like, in 2025, like, was absolutely, like, I've read the book multiple times and I've never gotten that part until now. Maybe that's because I'm transitioning as a person.
You get different things out of it when you read it at different points in your life, I think. Right?
Yeah. No, so good. Like, it's so good. Like, and then I do 3 books a week, and, like, that book still stays with me. Like, there's only, like, maybe 4 or 5 books that stay with me. The rest, like, are just nice ways of getting some new information in, but
I've read the Almanac of Naval Ravikant a couple of times or listened to it, and
mhm.
then The Psychology of Money. Just
Mhm. So good.
love them both. If
Yeah.
I just need something to listen to ground me, I put one of those on.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot. So for me, and, like, the Thinking Fast and Slow, it's not a
Oh, I'm
read.
in the middle of well, no, I'm only at the beginning of it, but I have it.
Like, it's a heavy read, like, and it's definitely a time investment. But Danny Kahneman, like, just the systems thinking, you see all of the heuristics that you're guilty of, right? There's just so much good from understanding your own fallacy. Like, we're all fallible. Like, we are fallible beings by design. Our
Mhm.
blueprint is to be fallible. We're not designed to be honest or truthful or earnest, but we still muscle our way into this better self-actualization. And I think part of it is that being aware of these systems. So
I know lots of people don't even think about there being a systems thinking way of approaching life in the world. So just elevating that for anybody listening, I love it. Yeah, and I'm gonna link all those books in our show notes. I'll link Richard Feynman, the articles that we have summarized on our page, and then the books that you suggested. So lots of good stuff to follow up on here, everybody. Thanks for tuning in to our semi-quick episode. We meant it to be 15 minutes, but I
yeah,
think it's
the
more
wife.
like 40.
So, and Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to everyone. And thanks, Alex. It was a fun episode 23.